Good afternoon. My name is Bob Corry. I'm the moderator for today's program in Brimfield Living History. This is the ninth in a series of current interviews that we've been conducting of prominent people from this area. Today we have a very exciting program. I'll get into that in just a moment. This series is being co-produced by the Brimfield Historical Commission, the Brimfield Public Access Television Channel, and the Brimfield Public Library. Today we're going to be interviewing Richard Sullivan, who grew up in Brimfield on Page Hill Road and has lived here virtually his entire life. He picked up a hobby when he was about 12 years old, he'll explain in a moment, of collecting artifacts from the American Indians that lived here before Europeans came. Richard, would you introduce yourself and give us a little bit of history?
Hello everyone, my name is Richard Sullivan. I did grow up on Page Hill, attended the elementary school, had Miss Weber, she made me what I am today. Went to Tantascwa, did a tour of duty in the Navy during Vietnam, came back and worked for UPS and then Brimfield Precision, where I retired from a few years ago. My story starts on a Saturday. I was probably 12, 13 years old. You know, there was snow on the ground. It was a February day, and I was going downtown to Ernie's Barber Shop to meet my buddy Bruce Adams. And we would sit there in front of the wood stove and play checkers. So one day this kid came in and we started talking to him. His name was Kenneth Alberts. And he was kind of excited about his father, who had just acquired a room down at a place in Wales called Santa's Wonderland, which was going to be kind of a small amusement park. And he said that his father grew up in Somers, Connecticut. And when he was a kid, there were some farmers there that had been there for many generations, and they decided to move their farming to Pennsylvania. And they left Kenny's father, Frank Alberts, with this huge trunk of Indian artifacts they had plowed up over a period of many years. And his father was a great antique collector, and he raised exotic birds. I got a story about the exotic birds, but maybe not today. But he was excited about the room at Santa's Wonderland, so I finally got down there with him and his father one day, and the walls were covered with all kinds of arrowheads and spearheads and tomahawks and everything. Well, of course, this was pretty exciting to me, being a Boy Scout and 12 years old, so I decided to go to our beautiful library in town and do a little reading. And the librarian turned me on to a book, The History of Brimfield. And I read this passage, and it's always kind of stuck with me. We all know that Brimfield is one of the hill towns of the state. In these days of railroads that among the valleys and seek out the smooth places of the plain, its being a hill town marks it as a sequestered spot. Pleasant it may be for those who love a quiet home, but offering no enticements to those who give their lives to the gainful pursuits of commerce and manufacturers. It is not, we must confess, even so rich in agricultural wealth as the fertile prairies of the western states. But aside from associations with friends of our youth or the labors of our riper years, Brimfield has charms that never fade, attractions that cannot change and pass away. Excuse me. Few New England villages have a lovelier spot for a village home than this broad plain with its encircling hillsides, far enough removed to give that indefinable commingling of light and shade, substance and form, which give enchantment to the view. Stand on the steps of this meeting house and look southward across the intervale to the wedge-like opening. Through this, you know, comes down the brook that in Wales has been so busily turning wheels and spindles. Or go to Haines Hill and look in this direction northward down upon the clustering houses of the village, sheltered under Sheep Pasture Hill. Reverend Dr. Dwight compared our village street to the crook of a letter Y. Up one arm of the Y we look to Sherman Pond, glittering in the sun like a diamond brooch. Looking up in the other direction, we see Tower Hill stand forth in majestic loveliness, like the rounded shoulder of some stalwart giant. And no one can fail to admire the natural loveliness his eyes behold, or ascend the ridge of Wattaquatic on the western line of the township, as the Indians often did, following the trail from the Nipmuc or Narragansett country to the Long River, the Connecticut. As late as 1815, one of the old inhabitants was unable to point out what were once hills of corn grown by the Indians on Indian Hill, where now there are large trees. Near the outlet of Sherman's Pond, many Indian arrowheads are frequently found. While living in the western part of the town, Mr. William H. Sherman found a stone utensil, an Indian pot or mortar, but so broken as not to be put back into its original shape. Stone hatchets or tomahawks have also been found both at Sherman's Pond and at Little Alum. Well, that was pretty interesting. So I decided one day to get on my bicycle and head down to a plowed field. In those days, there was a quarter-mile stretch of just farmland, plowed field, before you come to the nursing home. The houses weren't there that are there now.
Now, the nursing home you're referring to was on Brookfield Road?
Brookfield Road.
That's the old Sherman
The
place.
old Sherman homestead.
Yeah.
Yep, just before the pond. So it was after rain, and I looked for a while, and I found my first arrowhead, and that's what it looked like. It was just a plain white quartz arrowhead. And I kept looking and soon found more in that area. And then I tried to branch out with my bicycle and hit some other sites. And I found one really incredible site only a half a mile away, just east of Sherman Pond. And I began finding things like this here. These are some of the first points I found in that field. As you can see, most of them are white quartz, which was a common stone in this area. And this red stone is indurated shale from Chicopee. This is pretty common around here. And I'm not sure what this is with the white spots, but I also found...
Let me interrupt you. We see two different types of stone.
Mm.
You have quartz, which is the white one, and shale, which is the black one.
Red.
And you're saying
Reddish.
that's from Chicopee. Now, are there any
Chicopee.
deposits of shale in Brimfield or in the surrounding towns?
Not that I know of.
So then somebody would have had to have gone to
Oh, yeah.
Chicopee and returned with shale.
They were trading good stone all over the place. You'll see many different pieces. There's some from New York, some from Rhode Island, there's some from Pennsylvania jasper. But this is a very common stone in the Connecticut River Valley. It's red. You'll see it a lot.
Now, how do you date these stones? How do archaeologists do this?
Well, these particular arrowheads here, I would say, are from the woodland period, which aren't that old. They're probably from first contact about 450 years ago to somewhere in between, 2,700, 3,000 years, maybe a little beyond that, right in this period right here. But there are others, as you can see, that will date a lot earlier than that. And this is a
All right.
trade bead I found
Of
there.
everything that you've found so far, tell the audience, what's the oldest verifiable artifact that you've found personally? And give them some idea of where it came from. In other words, where was it found and under what conditions?
Well, the oldest thing I have is what's called a bifurcated base. These are probably 8 to 8,500 years old. Right over in this period, early archaic, somewhere right in there. And they're pretty rare. And this was found in Brimfield, off the Brookfield Road, a half a mile before Sherman Pond, by the brook that empties out of Sherman Pond.
That would
That's-
be Eastbrook, right?
I think so, yeah.
Yes. All right, so 8,000 to 8,500 years.
Yep.
Now, the technology for making these and the design of them
Well,
probably didn't, like today, we get a different iPod or we get a different generation of electronic, like on one day, and everybody's got them within a month. But this must have been very gradual.
Oh, yes, very gradual. Hundreds of years probably.
So some overlap.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what would cause the hunters, the American Indian hunters, to modify a point in favor of a new design?
I'm not sure. Maybe just hunting, the different prey, the hunting tactics, the terrain. They were constantly on the move. And, you know, like us trying to design new and better things, but things that work better for them. And, of course, in the early days, everything was a spear point and thrown with an atlatl for increased leverage.
Explain what that is.
An atlatl is a stick with a hook on it about this long, or it could be longer. She would put a spear on, probably a longer spear. A spear would maybe be this long. And in the back of that spear would be a little hole for that little hook to fit into. And at times, they would have a banner stone. This is an incomplete banner stone that was found at Webster Lake. This would have like wings on it and a hole drilled through it, and it would be on the stick to give it even greater speed, greater velocity when they threw it.
And maintaining some degree of accuracy?
Oh yeah, they were pretty good. In fact, there's clubs now that, like bow and arrow clubs, they have atlatl clubs that these guys get out just to throw spears with an atlatl. And they're pretty good at it. But eventually, the bow and arrow was slowly introduced. Every time I try to research that, I get a different date from, I don't know, 600 A.D. to 1700 A.D. to 3,000 years ago. So anyway, they kind of overlapped, and you know, the spear and the bow and arrow at the same time. But eventually, I think it just ended up being a bow and arrow.
All right,
for the most part.
what kind of game would you hunt with something like this?
Well, probably deer or anything. Well,
The remarkable
rabbit.
thing about it, this is stone, obviously.
Yeah.
We're talking about the American Indians at this time were Stone Age people.
Mhm.
They weren't using metal weapons of any type at
No.
that point. So they were flaking stone,
Mhm.
the type of stone that will flake, and then putting it on a wooden shaft and hurling it at a prey animal.
Yes.
And when you pick this up, what is remarkable about it is how sharp the edges are.
Mhm.
It's almost like it's sharper than a butter knife. Probably not. I mean, I don't know that I could cut my fingers, but I can tell you that would hurt.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, there are people in the world who still use obsidian for surgery because it's actually sharper than steel. It can flake to such a sharp edge that it's sharper than steel. And when you get on a site, if it's an Indian site, this is the kind of thing you'll see. These are flaked off of larger stones. And they used all this type
Open
of
your
stone,
hand a little and
like
drop it.
flint.
Yeah.
This here is a piece of flint. They used stone that was very hard and chipped with what they call a conchoidal fracture. In other words, it's not a layered stone, a sedimentary stone. It's very sharp, almost glass-like quality. The most common one around here was this white quartz stuff. So you see a lot of that in the gray quartz, quartzite. But the flint had to come in from different areas, mostly New York, I think. There's a great flint mountain up there. And Snook Hill, New York was another site. But you'll find this kind of thing. If you're on an actual Indian site, you'll find this type of flake material. And how they did it was with an antler, for the most part, I believe, and they knew how to flake something. You know, this is not a flaking stone. This is something else. But an antler, or they would chip it with another rock. But they got pretty good at it, obviously. And they made some beautiful things. That's the stuff you'll find on an Indian site if you're on an actual Indian site.
As
You
it
can overlook it very easily.
Arrowheads or spearheads.
Yeah.
Different types of tools for cutting. For example, if you were trying to remove the meat from a game animal you had killed, you have to have sharp
Well,
edges to do that.
they had other things for removing the meat. This type of thing. This is a knife that was found up
Wow.
by Tantasqua, a hand knife,
Huh. Now, what would something like that be used for?
scraping, cutting.
Okay.
Anything they needed a sharp thing for. This was probably another knife that was hafted onto a stick. Here's some more of that Chicopee shale. That's a scraper, hand scraper right there. Another one found on the way to Tantascwa.
Wow. Could I see that one that you just had? Yeah,
Now this here is pretty interesting. This is a piece of slate. It's broken. And I believe it's very fine and kind of
Yeah.
sharp, but it's part of an ulu knife, which is a very, very early knife. I think the Eskimos may still be using them up there. I don't know, or they did for quite a while. But very sharp thing. This had another wing on it like this.
these stones appear to be different
Yeah,
geologically.
yeah, yeah.
So, all right.
This is the type of quartz.
I know when we got together a couple of weeks ago, we were laying out what we're gonna discuss here. I showed you a couple of rock fragments that looked pretty much like that, only they were bigger. And you said that that type of rock would break very easily.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't be suitable.
No.
So, all right, take it from there. When you do succeed in creating something like a point like this, and it's fluted at the bottom here, clearly this is not something that is a natural geological thing. That looks, I mean, when you just handle it, you can see
Yeah.
places where it's been struck all over the place
Sure.
here. All right. What would you do with this now? You'd cut a branch that was straight, however long you need it to be, and then split it, huh?
Yeah, I think that they didn't want to split them. They wanted to carve it out and not split the wood, but then put it in there and haft it with rawhide, tie it in there with rawhide so that,
So
as
they
best
would
that
they would
could.
tie the wood like that around it and then
Yeah.
put a
yeah,
strain on it and pull it tight, huh?
Yeah. I think that the rawhide, if they wet it, it tended to shrink and
Yeah.
cement it in place.
Now, were they using spears, from what you can see, spears and later on arrows when they developed bow and arrow technology?
Yeah, they used both at the same time, and I read somewhere that they gave up the bow and arrow at one time and went back to the spear, but then they quickly went back to the bow and arrow, so, in different places.
Well, let me
I'm
ask
sure
you
it was
this.
different everywhere.
I remember in a course I took in college, the earliest hunters, this would be before the American Indians, this is all humanity, were actually hunting with stones. They were throwing stones and bringing down game with, like Roger Clemens would be a big guy in the throwing 100-mile-an-hour fastballs at 80 feet and hitting something right in the head and knocking it out.
Yeah,
And then they descend on it with clubs or whatever. These were the earliest hunters. But even though that technology appears very primitive, they were in fact very effective.
yeah, they might have been good pitchers. I guess they would have had to be. I'm not sure. But I don't think that lasted too long before they realized, hey,
You could do
I
better.
can sharpen a stick and throw it at these things, and there might be stick in there and do better than just bouncing them off
All
the
right,
head
so
with a
what's the
rock.
next generation from the fluted?
Well, I found a site one day in Warren, and I didn't realize it at the time, but it was a very old site. If I can find those. Might have put them out there already. Yes, I did. It's called Stark.
Don't move away from your mic.
And these are, around 8,000 years, 7,000 to 8,000 years old.
Huh.
And they're characterized by this base that is, comes to a point. Like this. If you can see that. The base comes to a point. And I think that fit into the hole that they made in the end of the spear rather nicely, probably. Might have been the reason for that design, I'm not sure. But these are very old. And this came from a site in West Brookfield in Warren that's been picked for 100 years probably, and I'm surprised there's still things left in there, but there are. It's a huge site along the Quabog River.
We're gonna get into sites around here, around Brimfield and the surrounding towns a little bit later in the program, but why don't we stay on the different types of tools?
Okay.
Show us some more.
Now, that site that I mentioned in West Brookfield, I found this beautiful scraper, quartzite scraper there one day.
Huh. That's quartz.
Fits
huh?
right in your hand, quartzite, brownish.
Quartzite.
Quartzite.
Okay, that's
Brownish
different. This
stone.
looks like
Yeah,
quartz.
quartz is more clear, more transparent, whitish.
Yeah, okay. And quartzite looks more like a sandstone.
Yeah.
But it's harder?
I don't know if it's any harder. It's just, I think quartz is probably harder.
Okay.
It's more glass-like. Quartz, I think, takes a little bit better edge.
And once again, you can see areas on this, am I correct? That this looks like a strike right here where they actually broke fragments of the
Yeah.
layers of this stone away in order to construct something they could use that would have a
Yeah.
very sharp edge. You could definitely use this for a number of different things.
On some arrowheads, especially flint ones, you can see the facets that were made when the little flakes of flint were chipped off. I mean, you can see, this one is better.
Wow.
You can see all the
Hold that
facets
up.
on that.
That's remarkable.
Yeah.
Now, how long would it take to make one of those? Do you have any estimate?
I really don't know.
Well, how
but I'm
many,
sure
how
they got
many
pretty good at
strikes
it.
do you see on that that
Oh,
would be separate?
Quite a few. I
Quite
mean,
a few,
to
yeah, it
start
looks
off
like-
with a flat blade of flint and come out with something like this. You know, I'm sure they tried to keep most of the flint and not waste it too much and try to get as many points out of it as they could.
Could I see that? Yeah. That's just remarkable.
That came from, well, I'll tell you about that site later on. West Brimfield.
West Brimfield.
West Brimfield.
So over in the area
along
of,
the river.
okay.
It's no longer a plowed field. There's trees there 40 feet tall, so it's kind of lost for the time being.
Just from your remarks so far, I gather that a lot of these artifacts were found in plowed fields?
Yeah,
Okay, and after a rain, huh?
yeah. After rain is good because the contrast, the darks will be darker and the whites will be whiter, and it's a little easier to see them
Yeah.
after rain. If you know what you're looking for, you can go onto a field after a rain, and these things will be like little diamonds glistening. You know, if it's a sensitive site, if it hasn't been picked for 100 years, and you know what you're looking for, they'll really show up. Nice
Well,
stuff.
I can imagine that the amount of work it takes to construct something this fine, they would not, if they threw a spear, one of the things, obviously, if it hit something, that's one thing, but if it missed, you would try to retrieve it.
Oh, definitely.
You know?
Yeah, definitely.
So, all right, given that, how do you account for so many arrowheads and spearheads and other types of tools being found around this area? Obviously, people lived here for a
Yeah,
long, long
well,
time.
Like us, I guess they like this valley, and they've been here for a long time, and there are so many sites here, it's mind-boggling. Once you realize where they are, how many there are, you can go near almost any stream that high ground, well-drained, and if it's plowed, you can probably find at least some sign of Indian artifacts, because they constantly shifted their camps around, following game. You know, they've been there for 7,000 or 8,000 years. They had a chance to be just about everywhere at one point or another.
Sure.
They're all over the place.
Like, we know that the European farmers used to move their farms every few years because the soil would get worn out.
Yeah.
They didn't have fertilizers. You couldn't go to Agway. You know, so you basically had to, when your crop yield started to drop, you'd move.
Yeah. Well,
So I'm sure the American Indians were doing the same thing. 'Cause
well, one of the things that they did that I read was off the Warren Road there was 1,000 or 2,000 acre tract, or probably they did it all over. They used to burn the brush in the spring, and this would create new lush growth for deer, rabbits, and this was a way of like game farming and keeping the heavy forests, you know, down. But I often wondered, the chestnut. Sometimes when you're out on the field and it's a beautiful spring day and your mind starts to wander, and you think, well, what did this place look like 4,000 years ago? Were the chestnut trees really this big? I wonder, and I think they probably were. I mean, there were areas where there were just primeval forests, huge, huge trees that had never been, you know, cut down. So I wish I could go back there and see that. We need a time machine. Not in my lifetime, but it's going to happen.
Well, you know, one other thing I recall in history that the American Indians from this area were showing the English settlers how to take a fish, and when they would dig a hole and put a seed in, like for corn or something, they'd put a fish at the base of this.
Yeah.
So as it decomposed, it would create some fertilizer
Yeah, sure.
and enrich the soil and enrich the yield of the plant.
You know, that one guy said that as late as 1815, you could still see the mounds of corn. Well, I saw the mounds of corn when I was a kid up there, and I went to Indian Hill. They were still there. I could still plainly see the mounds. There were huge trees growing up amongst them, but they were still there. And, you know, the Three Sisters, they call it, the corn, squash, and beans. That's what they planted, and they planted them in these hills, and they all grew together.
It's interesting, you mentioned Indian Hill. I don't know that a lot of people really know where Indian Hill is in fact located, or that there was an Indian old fort up there. I think it might be, just take a break for one moment. This is off of the Brookfield Road, basically north of Marsh Hill, where Brookfield Road and Marsh Hill come together. That hill that rises up, it was traditionally been called Indian Hill. And at one point, there was what was called the Quabog Old Fort up there. And myself, the landowner, Jerry Moran, and some archaeologists from Opakam, and a number of others, people who were very interested in this. We took a hike up there last spring and found a whole bunch of stone walls and all kinds of stone monuments and so forth that were associated with the hunting in that area and also with fortification. Very, very interesting. We've got quite a bit of history right here in Brimfield. All right, you want to show another artifact like this?
Okay.
How about, what is
That's
what
a
is
gouge.
that?
That's a gouge that was used for, you know, canoe making, perhaps, burning a log and scraping out the charred wood. This came from just east of Sherman Pond, a beautiful little gouge, still kind of sharp, and it was probably hafted on a stick and used something like a hoe to hoe out burnt wood.
You know, at this point, this is, Richard gave me this photograph a long time ago. Why don't you explain what this is, and then you can show how that tool would have been used.
That is a canoe that was found in the mud at the bottom of a pond that was in the Quabbin before they flooded it, I believe. And one of the ponds from either Prescott or one of the towns there,
or one of them, yeah.
Yeah. And that is in a museum now in New Salem, and very few people know about it. It's upstairs. It's just sitting there in the dark.
Can you actually get up there to see it?
Yeah, I think you can. Yeah.
And that's in New Salem.
New Salem, yeah.
Is this a
Historical Society.
It's a historical.
Yeah.
Is that open to the
I
public?
don't know when the hours are, but yeah, you can get in there. My good buddy's son-in-law, I think, manages the place or has something to do with it. So.
Well, explain how they went about making a canoe like this.
Well, I don't know exactly, but I would say that they would find a very large, I'm not even sure what kind of wood that is that they would use for something like that. But, you know, they'd take a large tree and just kind of hollow it out. And it must have taken a long time, but they used tools like this, and maybe tomahawks or whatever, just to beat and take the wood out of it.
You mentioned they'd start a fire in the wood, and they'd let it char.
Yeah.
And that would weaken the fibers, of course. And then you would take something like this the boat makers, and you can
Yeah.
see how it's scooped out over here. And you'd tear the char out.
Mhm.
And they would do that over and over again till they created what amounts to a hull
Yeah.
to keep the water out. Now, we know a few things about this. Some of the historic records that came with it. How many Indians could actually go in a canoe of this type?
Well, boy, let me look at that thing. I'm not sure. I wouldn't think too many. It doesn't have a very deep keel.
No.
So, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 in something that size, I think.
I know the document that came with it
They didn't
said
move
some
around
of
too
these
much.
were so big,
Yeah.
they could carry 40.
Well, yeah, probably
Adults.
not around here, but
Yeah.
northwest, in
Yeah.
that area.
Okay.
I'd like to talk about this site. One day I was out looking with my buddy Glenn McIntyre many years ago, and I used to drive by this cornfield, and I looked down at it. It was right next to the Quabog River in West Brookfield, and I went by it for years and years, and I said, now that's too low, that's got a flood in the springtime, so it's not a place where anybody would have wanted to live. And one day I got bored, and I said, okay, Glenn stayed in the car, and I walked down there, and I went into the field, and it was amazing. It was like they had just left the day before. There was stuff everywhere, you know, pieces of this kind of thing, soapstone bowls. This is soapstone. And I heard that there's a quarry of this stuff in Wilbraham, and they used to make bowls out of this before they learned how to fire pottery. But there was this stuff there, all kinds of flakes and, you know, chips. And I found very close together these two. They're called Atlantic. And these are beautiful points here, and they're 2 different materials. This one is flint, I've been told probably from Snook Hill, New York. And this one looks like felsite or rhyolite to me. But they're almost identical with 2 different materials. And I found quite a few other things. That little side notch point there from, I don't know what that is, chert probably. And different types of arrowheads down there over the years. Like I said, now there's trees
Before
there
you put those away,
40 feet tall.
you know, this is a good history lesson as well. This is flint.
Yeah,
It is not from New England.
not from New England.
They've never found any deposits of it.
Not that I know of.
But the Mohawks from upper state New York
Yeah.
would have flint.
They traded. They traded all over the place for different materials. And there is some flint I heard in the hills of Holyoke, but it's a very minor deposit of it. But these Atlantic style points are 4,000 to 6,000 years old, so they
Wow.
would be late archaic on my chart over there.
That is,
In Brimfield.
and you found those
down by the
2
river.
different, similar arrowheads made with different,
Right. They were almost side by side.
yeah.
They were, you know, late archaic, right in this area right here. A great site, a beautiful site. Now it's a forest. So unless you can get permission to get in there and dig, it's gonna stay
So
that
we've
way
got
forever.
Points for weapons,
Mhm.
and I'm sure fishing would be included in some of the uses for a spear,
Probably, yeah.
okay, as well as hunting on land.
Mhm.
Now, and you also have gouging
Yeah, just-
tools, you've got tools that are designed for scraping,
Mhm.
yeah, and hollowing out the hull of a canoe to give you a little bit of freeboard, so you don't sink. And then you have stones like this that you can clearly see a line right around here, which would be created by what, somebody?
Pecking away. They
Huh?
would peck away at that stone and just work it with just pecking it away.
Now, what's the purpose of this, do you suppose?
Well, that was a banner stone or an atlatl weight. It would have had, they abandoned this one for some reason. It would have had a hole drilled through it, and it would have fit on the shaft to give you more leverage for throwing a spear.
Huh.
And the wings on it would have been much thinner. This was abandoned before it was done.
Okay.
I'd like to tell you, I had a friend, Jane Metcalf, and she lived right down by Sherman Pond. And in the old days, there was a public beach right there where all the kids from town would go swimming. And one day when she was a little girl, she said she went there, and after a rain, was laying on the beach, and she looked, and there was this beautiful arrowhead laying right beside her. This isn't it. She still has it. But this is the type of stone it was. It was like a brown jasper from Pennsylvania. Nothing, none of this stuff in Massachusetts. But the creamy brown jasper, Pennsylvania. Now I hear there's some deposits in Rhode Island also. But you know, that's the most beautiful spearhead I've ever seen. And it was the only thing she's ever found. And it's better than anything I ever found in my life. And I don't have any hatchets. And one day I took my buddy Brian Smith to a site east of Sherman Pond along a brook, and he found a hatchet his first time out. I've never found one. So this is the kind of thing that can happen. I'm happy.
Now, not
I'm
the
glad.
wooden part of the hatchet,
No,
rather
no,
the stone
yeah, that's
part.
all
huh?
long gone. Just the stone. He still has it.
Now, how closely did that hatchet resemble this, for
Yeah,
example?
it more resembled this than something like that. It would, you know, it'd just be hafted on a stick, a sharp edge here.
Yeah.
And I was told that all the Braves had a hatchet, but if they were that ubiquitous, I don't know why I haven't found more. But it would look something like this, sharp edge, you just use them for whack-a-mole, whatever. Now, one day I was fishing. This is interesting. One day I was fishing on a little stream in Warren, and I noticed this glacial boulder. And I said, well, that looks interesting. I wonder if that could be a rock shelter. And so I walked over to it, and I noticed that there was all sand kicked up where a woodchuck had been digging a hole under the rock. And I happened to look in the dirt that he was digging up, and I found all these pieces of Indian clay pot
Wow.
that he had dug up for me. Thank you. Thank you very much. And this is what they look like. There's little pieces of sand and stone in them, which when they fired them would help hold the clay together. But you can see they're slightly rounded and all about the same thickness. So that was probably one particular pot there that busted up over hundreds, thousands of years.
Could
Who
I see
knows?
that? Now, how big would these pots be?
Oh, sometimes they were very big. Sometimes they were big.
And what were those used for? Water?
Carrying water, probably. Maybe corn, I'm not sure.
Now, I know when we were together, I showed you, what is it, an orb? Or it's a plant, and it has like a hull, a shell, like a
Oh, yeah,
squash.
a
but-
gourd. Yeah,
A gourd,
yeah.
gourd.
Gourd, yeah.
Explain, what type of vegetables are we talking about here? And are they native? They would be native, obviously.
Yeah, I have one hanging in front of my house, and I use it for, put a hole in it, I use it for a birdhouse. The birds go to nest there every year. But I forget what kind of gourd that is. But you can buy them in the store, already dried with the interior removed and dried out.
And you could carry water in them
Yeah.
and so forth, huh?
Sure. Now, there's a book by Donald Duffy, and on the front of it, it's about the local Indians. On the front of it is a picture of a huge clay pot that was
Yep,
found over by
I have
West
that book.
Brookfield, West
And
Brookfield.
Brimfield Library has
Yeah.
one as well. Quabog and Nipmuc Indians.
I guess the story was some guys were logging, and they found pieces of this bowl, and they realized, hey, there's a lot of pieces here, and somebody got it and put it together. So it's nearly a complete bowl. But that was very large bowl.
Would they decorate the outside?
Oh, yeah, probably,
Boy, this is just remarkable. And this would be clay that was fired,
yeah.
huh?
Clay mixed with sand, just endured better,
Huh.
like that.
That's amazing. And this was all found in one place, huh?
Tempted to go back there and look for more. It's private property. A lot of the things you find are these very small, they're called bird points, I guess. And, like around here, most of them are white quartz, a few flint things. Look at this little tiny thing. I couldn't believe that when I found that little tiny thing. It looks like just a flake with side notches on it. I said, that can't be. Somebody's kidding me.
Wow.
And here's another one.
That feels like a razor,
Yeah,
so sharp.
Flint
Yeah.
and chip, very sharp.
That's remarkable.
Yeah.
And they all have a characteristic shape. Look
Yeah.
at this. I don't know if you can zoom in on that, but look at the, that's amazing,
You know?
you know?
Yeah. Well, a lot of these small quartz and triangular points,
Now, this should be used for what?
They-
Bird hunting?
yeah, probably just any small game. They were arrowheads. You know? The larger things were spearheads because they're just too heavy for an arrow to go accurately. But these triangular points, they span from woodland period very late. The later ones they're called squib knocket, but you know, they can be just about any age. Now here's one. I know where that came from. Right behind the auction acres.
The auction acres.
Grand Trunk out there. When we were a kid, it was, you know, the sides of it had eroded away, and you can find artifacts out there because there's Mill Brook that goes right down through there.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of stuff there still, probably. Of course, it's private property now.
Yeah, you know, when we got together, we were talking about an article that appeared, I believe, in the Boston Globe, probably about a month or two back, and it described some boys that right during the spring had been in Rhode Island. They were walking along an embankment next to a river, and the water had washed away a portion of the
Oh, yeah,
embankment,
yeah.
and they found dozens of artifacts there
Yeah, well-
that have all been authenticated.
My buddy lives part-time, Al Landry. I got him interested in this hobby when we were in our 20s, and he's been looking ever since. But he has a home on Martha's Vineyard now, and he looks along the beaches where the cliffs get eroded away after a storm. Him and his buddy Bill Moody, and I guess over the years they found a lot of stuff. Of course, Martha's Vineyard in Nantucket, they had a lot of Native Americans on them over the years. It was just a great place. Still is a great place. There may even be remnants. Yeah, I'm sure there are remnants of the tribe still there.
All right, is this a proper time to give a series of recommendations on where you would look, where you'd advise people?
Why?
Given private property rights, you have to
Well-
get permission, especially if they're posted.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, you don't
What
wanna
if
be
what if
breaking
land
any
is
laws.
not posted?
Yeah, if land is not posted and it's a plowed field and it's near water, you can go in there and, you know, if you want to ask, that's fine too. You're probably better off asking if you find the landowner. But if it's not posted, you go in any plowed field that has high ground. They really like sandy soil because it was well drained. So if you can find a piece of high ground with a brook running through it that's plowed, you know, go at it, and you'll probably find something. I know of 6 or 7 sites within a half a mile right here where we are. Good sites, you know, you can't look anymore because they're all overgrown or they're on private property. But there are places, boy, I never got into, and I know they're there. I can just look at them. After a while, you can tell. When you've looked at so many places and you found places that were used and you find chips or arrowheads there, you compare them to other sites where there wasn't, and you'll see what they were looking for. You know, is it a place you'd want to live? You know, you'd want to set up camp for a night or a week or a year, and you can kind of develop a sixth sense about it. It's pretty easy to do, and that's what I've done. But there's sites here in town that they have to be loaded. I just discovered one after the tornado that I hadn't really thought about, and I know it's just fantastic. So I went in there, and there was an upturned tree, and in the roots of it, like so many of those large trees got blown over, and I found a huge piece of brown flint. I said, okay, this is the place. You know, you don't find flint unless it's associated with a village site or, you know, a campsite. And so I know that that's near a river. I know it's a perfect spot. Syog is another place. When I was a kid, I could walk along the trail there, and I could see chips of flint and quartz and occasionally an arrow.
Where is this again?
Syog in Holland.
Oh,
Holland.
Syog.
Lake Syog.
Yes.
A small pond, the first one you come to.
Sure.
And even Hamilton Reservoir, even though that's been
Now, would you
dammed
walk
up.
the beach or would you
Ah,
walk an embank,
Yeah, well,
walking near an embankment?
see, after the 55 flood, they moved all the houses out of there. So there were like vacant driveways and trails there that hadn't grown over with grass. And you could see, you know, flakes, flint, you know, the workings of what the, you know, tool making. And, you know, it's kind of overgrown now, but Sliog was a spot that was loaded, and some of those other little ponds there. I recently heard a story that one of them, somebody was attempting to build something there, and they uncovered a whole bunch of skeletons, and they immediately covered it back up and walked away from it. I don't know how many years ago. This was a story that this guy just told me a week ago about when he was a kid. But Holland is a place that's loaded with things also. You know, there's a lot of water that goes through there. And I found a site right by the public beach on the other side over there that I occasionally walk through, but there's a lot of pine needles now.
Now, this would be opposite from where the
Yeah.
Army Corps of Engineers beach is?
The public beach is on this side, closer to Brimfield, but the Corps of Engineers beach is on the other side. But there's stuff in both places.
And we should add that that Army Corps of Engineers beach, which is off Lake Syog Road, which is off the Holland Road out of Brimfield, right down into Mashpog Road, that is probably the best beach in this area
Yeah.
that I've ever seen.
Mhm.
I've never seen anything that, it's very well groomed, it's very well cared for. It has all the amenities down there. It's a wonderful place to bring your family. They have places you can have a cookout, picnic tables, and there aren't many people there, so it's a
No.
great place. But
Yeah.
if you look around, let's say from the Army Corps of Engineers beach, where would you be most apt to find Indian artifacts?
Well, I'll tell you, in 1675, I don't know if you ever heard the story of Ephraim Curtis. He came inland. It was for the governor to explore inland here, and he went to this island, which is now called Curtis Island. Well, he was across the river from it.
I know this.
And
Yeah.
there were 200 Indians hooping and hollering over there on the other side, and I think they finally calmed down. But that place, of course, I found points there too over the years. It's all overgrown now, so it's hard to do, but there was a dusty cart road going through there. You know, when I was a kid, there were houses there. The Jolins lived there. There were 2 or 3 houses right there, but after the 55 flood, they got bought out and they had to move out. And guys used to go in there and coin detecting, but it's kind of overgrown now. But there's so many places, it's just incredible. Any high ground along the river, the Quabog, the Quinnebog River there, stuff, you know, lots of stuff. I mean, there's one place, tell you a little story. These Brewerton eared points, these are probably 5,000 years old. They got little ears on them. And they can be quite beautiful. This is flint, very, very delicate.
Yeah.
Thin and delicate.
You can see the design,
Yeah.
the different design,
facets.
between those and the ones that are fluted.
This one says Sherman Pond.
Huh.
One day, many years ago, I was there was a cornfield. The Reeds used to live there. Alan Reed and Ted Reed, and then Keogh lived in that red house, or white house with the big red barn. But behind there, across the brook, there was a cornfield, and you used to be able to walk in there, and kind of behind Mike Wales's house, in a little cart road, and I found that arrowhead one day,
Wow.
40 years ago, right in the cart road. And of course, there's plenty of other stuff in that field leading all the way back to town here. So
Now, these are all in
Everywhere.
approximately the same,
same type of
same type,
eared
so the
point.
same, you would say the same
Yeah,
age,
Yeah.
roughly. Yeah.
roughly. Yeah. I mean, you got to be a real expert to delineate some of these things.
But
from
the
other.
manual, for example, the manual you had
Yeah,
is written by an expert
yeah.
in Indian artifacts. Why don't you show the front cover so that,
Yeah, this book just came out. Just obtained a copy of it. I was told that they only made 100 copies. I
Huh.
don't know why so few, but it cost me $90.
Huh.
A New England typology of Native American projectile points by Jeff Boudreau, who has since passed away, I've been told. It's a great book if you're interested in this kind of thing. There's some of those bifurcated base points, which are 8,000 to 9,000 years old here.
Wow.
And it just goes through all different styles and types and their ages and the different
And that's
materials.
going back in time,
Yeah.
huh?
And the different types of material is
What is the
lithic.
oldest artifact that they've authenticated? Do you know?
Around here, probably the fluted points. These paleo fluted points here. See if I can get a good picture.
So you're talking 5,000 years
Oh,
ago.
right on the front page here, these things are, some of
Yeah.
these have, there are sites along the Connecticut River where they have found these, and these are like
Huh.
9,000 and 10,000 years old.
Wow.
Dina Dinkaus, she used to be a professor at UMass, and she used to excavate some of these sites along the Connecticut River. And of course, there were so many of them that many they never got to, I guess, and they just left them or covered them up so they wouldn't be stolen from. But yeah, this is a great little book. And it shows the different types of materials here. This is that Chicopee indurated shale I was talking about. You know, a reddish color. That's very easy to distinguish from other stones. There's a lot of that used around here. And more so the closer you get to the Connecticut River, because it was available. With all the other stuff, a lot of it had to be brought in and traded. Talking about kineorhyolite, a lithic outcropping in central Maine, Kineo, Maine. Vinyl Haven, outcropping along the coast of Maine. Munsungun Chert, Maine. You know, this stuff came from everywhere. Oh yeah, this reminds me. I have it's an interesting little artifact if I can find it.
All right, while you're searching for that, I want to show the audience a particularly amazing artifact that came from Brimfield, is believed to have come from a farm up on Indian Hill, again up on Brookfield Road in the vicinity of Marsh Hill Road. And it went to a, what this is a giant mortar. The American Indians in this area, the Nipmucks and the Quabogs, used to take acorns and other types of nuts that were harvested from the forest, corn, and so on and so forth, and put them inside of this bowl right here. And then you can just imagine dozens of hands with circular, almost like small bowling ball type rocks, pounding these grains and nuts and so forth into powder, where they would then be baked into a sort of a bread, and usually on top of hot rocks. From what I've seen, they'd build a fire underneath a flat rock that was relatively thin till it got to a very hot temperature, and then would put this dough-like material on top of it and cook it into a biscuit-like form. And the archaeologists that have seen this in person say it's A, one of the largest ones they've ever seen, and B, it would take hundreds, I don't even want to go on the outer edge, how long it would take to create this cavity in granite by pounding rocks on it. It would take hundreds of years, they said, hundreds, under constant use. It's very remarkable.
It's a beautiful thing, which reminds me, I'm always surprised that people don't know the origins of bowling, how bowling started. But
Wow.
this isn't going to tell you. Glenn McIntyre, good friend of mine, he passed away a couple of years ago, and he left this to me. And this is a grinding stone that would go in a mortar like that to grind corn.
Wow.
Nice stone, but you can see on the bottom it's flat and smooth from many years of hard work. making that corn.
That is remarkable. Show the bottom. It's actually flattened out
Yeah.
and
yeah.
shiny. You see that right here?
Glenn found this on that site.
Wow.
By Sherman Pond, just east of Sherman Pond.
Huh.
And you know the mortar
Yep.
that probably went with it.
Okay. We don't talk about that.
No, we don't talk about it.
That's
But that's
private property.
That's where this came from.
Yeah.
Many, many years ago. He was so excited when he found this thing. Yeah, you never know what you're gonna find.
All right,
Anyway.
we're running out of time here a little bit, but I wanted to ask you if kids, let's say a Boy Scout troop or a group of young men and women and their parents are interested in this, would you be willing to give another lecture, maybe in the Brimfield Library, where people could actually look at this more carefully?
Yeah, possibly, yeah, sure.
Okay?
If I live long enough,
Yeah, I think you'll live long
get over the
enough.
stress of this one.
All
Before
right.
we go, I just want to show you these beautiful little drills that they made for drilling through leather, perhaps other materials. The little wings on that, you can see that.
Now, you saying
Very
you
fine.
made them or you
Yeah,
found them?
well, I found them. They were made. Indians
Yeah.
made them for drilling into different materials.
Huh. Well, this is a fascinating collection, and you're still doing this today.
Occasionally, but most of the sites are long gone. They're just lost. They don't plow anymore. Farming is not what it used to be. Or there's houses there. A lot of the great sites are now housing developments, like the Brookfield Road.
Okay, when we talked before, you mentioned, and we've already gone over, the fact that good sites to check are plowed fields,
Yeah.
particularly after a rain, the beds of streams, high ground near water, you brought that up,
Mhm.
and also where two streams come together.
Yeah,
That's a very good place to search.
very good. Two streams come together.
And we have a number of streams here in Brimfield. Up Dunham Town Road, you go over culverts, bridges, and whatnot. There's streams that are very, very old, running underneath, underneath the road up there. There's one in my backyard. And we got to wrap this up, but
Mhm.
you have anything else you'd like to
Well,
mention?
you can go almost anywhere. Sometimes, when I was young and wild, I'd go to Putnam, Connecticut, antiquing, and there was a field there by the Quinnebog River, and I went in there one day in Putnam and found an arrowhead. Or up to my sister's house in Sterling, there's a river in front of there with a plowed field. I went in there and found an arrowhead. You can find them just about anywhere near water if you look hard enough.
All right. Well, this is fascinating, and maybe we're going to ignite the imagination of a young man or a young woman, and it will
Yeah.
start a lifelong search themselves.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for this.
You're welcome. I hope you've enjoyed the show.